let's call this order and get her going. Welcome to the Wednesday, September 15th, 2021 virtual meeting of the Thurston County Planning Commission. Good to see you all here. Sorry. Okay, so let's do introductions, and let's start out with Donna. Hang on, Donna. Let me see.
You're muted, Donna.
Okay.
There you go.
There. Okay. Thanks. I'm Donna Nickerson, and I represent the three.
Thanks, Donna.
Yeah.
Ed.
Ed Fleischer, District 2.
Scott.
Scott Nelson, District 3.
And Dawn.
Don DeHaan, District 1.
Doug.
Yeah, or already did that. Yeah. To District 3. Is that what
Okay,
you're?
thank you, Donna.
Doug Carmen, District 2.
Eric.
Eric Casino, District 2.
And is that you, Kevin?
Yes, Kevin Pestinger, District 1.
Thank you. And I'm Jim Simmons from District 3. Thank you all. So I'm looking for an approval of the agenda.
I so move.
And second.
Oops. Any changes or anything anybody seeing needs to be adjusted? Additions? Okay, all those in favor of the approval of the agenda for September 15, 2021, signify by saying aye.
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 Any nays? Okay, we're moving to the next item. For a approval of the meeting minutes from August 18th, 2021.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been approved and seconded to approve the meeting minutes from August 18th, 2021. Is there any changes or amendments that need to be made? All those in favor of approval of the meeting minutes for August 18th signify by saying aye.
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 Any disapprovals? Okay, we're moving to Polly's there. We're moving to public communications. This is a chance for anyone in the public to speak on an item that hasn't been already discussed through a public hearing. So please raise your hand and we will call you and get you unmuted. And you have 3 minutes. There'll be a timer there for you to see. It'll kind of green, yellow. You have 30 seconds when it turns yellow. And when it's red, please kind of wrap up your thoughts. So we're moving on here, and looks like the first one with the hands up is Carolyn Womovsky. I'm sorry if I killed that, but.
Yes, I'm Carolyn Womovsky, the owner of the property at 6711 198 Southwest Rochester in the GAs.
Grand Mound UGA.
Grand Mound UGA. And we've been trying for 20 years, and we would like to have the zoning changed. I understand the zoning is agriculture. So I would like to have you consider our property to be in the new zoning.
Okay, Carolyn, I think you need to get a hold of staff and get that process going. Right now, that's probably not in our purview. You just need to check with, I would contact staff on that subject.
Okay, thank you.
You bet, thank you. Loretta Stepanen?
Okay, so let's email Shannon Chula.
Hello, this is Loretta Sepinen. I live in the city of Olympia, and I want to speak this evening on the Upcastle rezone request. And specifically, I want to talk about the proposed change to the code, that part of this request. That's code 2029. This code change, the language there, has impact well beyond the 2 farm parcels on our southern border. The code allows, right now, the code really allows for like truck repair and feed stores and wood products outside of, in the rural area, and that people can rezone to that. And in very special conditions, there can be a zoning for manufacturing and warehousing, but it has to be within a half a mile of an I-5 interchange and have rail access and have vehicle access to a major roadway. Now, the parcels that you're considering here and that you'll eventually have the responsibility of sending a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners about is not on an I-5 interchange and doesn't have direct access to major roadway. So that's why there's some language change that's been proposed to you. And when I look at the language change, I think of Cinderella story and some Cinderella slipper. And essentially the code change is like trying to shove a foot into, a foot into a slipper. It's the stepsister's foot, and it's trying to go into a glass slipper. And it not only doesn't fit, but it actually cracks the glass slipper, because by that I mean is that the code breaks open the door to way more warehouse requests in the county than just on those 2 properties. In fact, all along Maytown Road, or right next to the interchange at Maytown Road, you have properties that would then become eligible for this consideration because they'll meet the language change that you might be making. And then once they meet it, then the properties next to that will be able to meet it. And the ones next to that will be able to meet it. And you'll have a snowballing effect going on in the county. I think it's important that warehouses, that you regard the warehouse issue as being a big decision, and it might take you more time and more consideration. I think you need some maps that show you where this could have impact elsewhere in the county. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to speak? I'm not seeing any other hands. Okay, you're up, Chrissy.
Can you all hear me now?
We got you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I just want to echo the previous speaker regarding the code change, because the ripple effect, I think, she's just spot on with the magnitude of the single code change and what it could mean for warehouse implementation in the county and just the real impact on rural areas. And so I think it's important to really take time with this and look at how large this decision is outside of just looking at one particular property. So ditto, ditto, ditto to what was just presented. Thank you.
Thanks, Christy. Is there anybody else that would like to speak? I'm not seeing any other hands. Anybody else? Okay, we're moving on. Thank you for all those that spoke up. Our next item on the agenda is the work session for the 2022 to 2027 capital improvement programs. And turn it over to Jennifer.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Jennifer Davis, Community Planning Manager. I'm here tonight with several representatives of different departments throughout Thurston County. Maybe I'll take a moment before I launch into the presentation for them to just quickly introduce themselves and the department that they're with, so you can put a face to a topic as I go through the presentation. And then at the end of the presentation, you'll have time to ask questions of these staff members who know way more than I do about the individual projects in the CIP. So let me just go around the horn here and start quickly with Rick Thomas.
Good afternoon, Rick Thomas, Public Works. I'm the manager for the Projects Program Management Office. And my primary job was just to coordinate the different departments within Public Works.
All right, thanks, Rick. And Scott Lindblom.
Yes, good evening. I'm Scott Lindblom. I'm the County Engineer for Public Works. My focus tonight will primarily be on the transportation side of the CIP.
Great. And Jeff Bickford.
Good evening. Hi, I'm Jeff Bickford. I'm the Solid Waste Manager for Thurston County. So my piece, of course, will be the solid waste related items.
Thank you, Jeff. And Ed Marson.
Good evening, Ed Marson, Thurston County Parks Maintenance and Operations Manager.
Thanks, Ed. And Michael Lohman.
Good evening, I'm Michael Lohman. I'm with Public Works. I'm here on behalf of the Parks and Trails.
Great. And Tim Wilson.
Good evening, Tim Wilson, Water Resources Manager with Public Works, and my portion is the stormwater utility, water and sewer utilities.
I think that's everyone I see, unless there's anyone else hanging around. Oh, Jason Ash.
Oh, I'm Jason Ash with Central Services. I'm the Facility Services Manager, and I'll be doing the portion for the county facilities.
Great. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work out. Can everybody see that first slide, capital improvement program? I can't see you, so give me a yes if you can see it.
Yes, I can.
Now I can.
Thank you. Great. All right. So as Jim announced, this is the 2022-2027 draft capital improvement program that you'll be reviewing this evening. And then after going through it fairly quickly and at a very high level, I will be asking you to set a public hearing as the next step in the process. Just as a background, we do this big replacement of the last capital improvement program, which runs for 6 years. Each year in the fall. So many of you, I think Kevin's the only one who hasn't been down this road before with us. And it's a lengthy document. You were emailed the document. And this is the highlights. The Board of County Commissioners was briefed in detail at a pretty much all-day briefing back in July with a version of this presentation. It got into more detail and the board was able to provide some direction on various projects, and that is reflected in the draft that is coming to the Planning Commission at this stage. So let me see if I can go forward. Okay, so CPED's role, my department's role is just to coordinate all of this. The hard work is done by all the individual departments that have capital facilities. So just as a reminder, the Growth Management Act requires us to have a capital facilities element in our plan, our comprehensive plan. And this CIP is a key part of that capital facilities element. It's the 6-year financing plan. It's Appendix G of the comp plan. That's why it comes to you. It is not a budget. It is aligned with the county budget and may be amended whenever the county budget is amended. But it is a plan and it's forward-looking, and it's to ensure consistency with our capital facilities planning and our population growth. and that we're implementing the levels of service that are defined in the comprehensive plan for all our various facilities, such as the number of acres of parks we should have per person in the county, and things like that. It's a coordinated effort, as this little Venn diagram type of thing shows. CPED coordinates public works and facilities, annually update, and sometimes more than once annually update their project lists and financial plans, levels of service. If necessary, the budget office ensures that these plans are coordinated with the budgets so that there's actually appropriated money to pay for the things in this plan on a yearly basis. And then this plan also reports out the capital facilities summaries from school, fire districts, and PUDs. That's just a report out. We have no decision authority over those separate plans, but we are required under GMA to at least account for those and put those in our plan. So the capital facilities we're covering tonight: transportation, water, sewer, stormwater, solid waste, parks and trails, county buildings. And again, those three at the bottom are capital facilities of other jurisdictions that we do not get very involved in. So I won't be going over those in detail tonight. The Planning Commission role, I know sometimes it feels like, geez, by the time this gets to us, it's pretty well baked. And that's because a lot of work does go into all of these capital facilities plans and programs for years, sometimes in advance, before they ever come to the Planning Commission. So really the Planning Commission role is to just host a conversation about the CIP, ask questions, seek clarification, host a public hearing, gather that public comment, and be able to make that recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. We're going to launch into each thing. I'm going to go fast, and at the end you can ask questions, so be writing them down as we go, but I'm going in the order that these facilities are actually listed in the CIP itself, the draft received over email. It's also posted online at thurstonplanning.org for anyone following along. You can look under capital facilities plan or capital improvement plan or program on our website, and you can see all these drafts. But parks and trails is our first category. And again, as you can imagine, the capital facilities involved in parks and trails are really to do the infrastructure repairs and upgrades, add capacity where necessary to maintain those levels of service. And then really looking forward, trying to do actions and take actions that are going to reduce the maintenance costs over time for these facilities. If you can imagine, it takes a lot to maintain a park and a trail and all of the associated facilities. So smart investment up front for the life of these facilities is definitely something that that group has an eye on. There's a lot of citizen input that goes into this. There's a Parks and Open Space plan and planning process that goes through. The funding sources are listed here. These are listed in detail in the draft CIP, as well as the expenditures. They come from parks impact fees paid through the development community, real estate excise tax, federal and state grants, and our conservation futures fund, which is a property tax collected on county residents that goes into good stuff related to conserving open space and habitat and parks for the future. And Parks and Trails expects to spend $9.9 million over the next 6-year period. Throughout the CIP, you get these tables, which are basically the roll-ups of all of the different projects and their costs and their funding source and where they're located. And you can see over time how much money is anticipated to be spent on a yearly basis, and whether that's for the design phase, the construction phase, and then the closeout of the project. So again, I'm not going to spend time on these at this overview, but all of this detail is captured in the CIP. Some of the highlights, though, I will hit on for each of these areas of capital facilities. We have an amazing park, Deschutes Falls Park, and it needs some improvement in its walkways and viewpoint. I was just there recently, and it's a pretty gorgeous and special place in Southeast Thurston County, and making it more accessible to folks to be able to enjoy it is definitely something that we want to look forward to. There are several park restroom improvements at a few of our county parks. There's Chehalis Western Trail, culvert replacement and fish passage projects are generally in the transportation plan, but this one has to do with the trails, so it's captured in the Parks and Trails plan. There's multiple trailhead improvements, whether it be putting in more parking or better parking to be able to access our trails, and then the continued development of our Gate to Billmore Trail, which is one of our newer trail facilities. Next, I'm going to go into solid waste as much as I can, because again, I'm not the expert. I'm delivering the information. You can ask questions at the end of the experts. But again, I mean, obviously a key county service to take care of your waste and recycling, and there needs to be ongoing and continuous improvement of our, waste recovery center, and all of those things that get our waste from folks to our landfill, to our recycling, to where it needs to go. And there are a lot of course, legal and regulatory requirements about how that waste is managed, environmental monitoring, and improvements to those pieces and infrastructure are reflected in the capital improvement program. It's funded by the Solid Waste Fund and expects to spend $28.5 million over the next 6 years. Again, all of the projects are listed in a table and which phase of the project is covered in which year, with the 6-year total at the end. And then here are some of the project highlights. Upgrading the flare system, which is basically that methane control and treatment system at the landfill. SCADA or SCADA, I don't know how to say it. All I know is that it's the electronic control system that basically supports both the flare and the environmental monitoring that's required at the landfill, and that system needs an upgrade in order to work properly. There's security technology site improvements and other upgrades and reconfigurations of the Waste and Recovery Center site. New public tipping area and scales and scale houses. If you've been out there, you've seen it's a little bit of a hodgepodge of different buildings. So I think some improvements I think we would all feel good about to see over time. And then a second location for a transfer station facility as well, since we are a growing county, and with new people comes more waste. And so we have to be able to handle that in an efficient way without those long lines. Storm surface water utility projects. So again, these are focused on reducing local flooding and improving water quality throughout Thurston County. Stormwater is a huge source of non-point source pollution to our rivers and our streams and our marine areas. And the stormwater facilities that we have in place basically work to help neutralize that pollution. And also to control flooding as we get our heavy rains, like I think we're going to get Friday. The funding sources come from utility fees. There is a stormwater utility fee that folks do pay, and grants. And this program is one of our smaller programs, but $5.6 million over the next 6 years. And here are this is the rundown of the different facilities. And again, you're not supposed to be able to read this in detail. This is just an overview of the table where all of the projects are listed and the money that is to be spent year to year. Here are some of the highlights. Woodland Creek Estates, which is a neighborhood, their system needs improving to take care of flooding and biofiltration. Swale is being added again to kind of take that pollution out at the source and not let it get out to river streams or Puget Sound. Another outfall repair, Manzanita Road, retrofits of the stormwater systems at Woodard Creek and Madrona Beach, many other stormwater facility improvements, and some land acquisition in concert with conservation futures for future stormwater facilities to handle all of our stormwater. Transportation projects. So transportation is a big budget item, as you can imagine. Lots of projects here. There's a whole separate transportation improvement plan or program that is written up in a lot of detail and adopted separately through the Board of County Commissioners. And what's summarized in the capital improvement program is basically a summary of what's in that plan. The County Roads Fund, development impact fees, real estate excise tax, many different federal and state transportation grants. Those are the funding sources, and it's $91 million or so over the next 6 years. So I can barely fit it on this slide. This is a list of the projects in the expenditures table and the phases of those projects. There's a lot of pavement preservation projects, road upgrade projects, Some of the other highlights are bridge repairs, obviously necessary, a lot of safety, pedestrian improvement, ADA related project improvements, and culvert replacement for fish passage to make sure that the salmon that we're trying to recover can make it underneath our roadways and not have them act as a barrier. And I know a lot of those projects are funded by the Recreation Conservation Office and other funding sources. Important work. Transportation is also conservation work. Water and sewer utilities projects. So this has to do with, of course, one of the most important things, safe, reliable drinking water for our customers. There are a lot of state and federal regulatory requirements that must be met, and a lot of demand for this service. And again, growing county and keeping up with that demand is a challenge. And we're meeting that challenge. Funding sources come from the real estate excise tax, the water and sewer utility fees, and it's about 10.2 million over the next 6 years. And here is a list of those, and you'll see that there's another control system evaluation upgrade of sort of the monitoring system that is used to make sure everything's working properly from a remote standpoint. Tamashan water treatment unit, Boston Harbor wastewater treatment, Grand Mound, Olympic View. Some of you may live in these neighborhoods or know people who live in these neighborhoods and who are served by these smaller sort of standalone systems to handle sewer. And these are all in our rural area. These are not the big city sewer system. This isn't a lot. These have to be done on a smaller scale, and expansion of them is somewhat limited as well. Here are some of the highlights. Again, improvements, making them deliver clean water and handle all the things that go down our toilets is the name of the game. And again, keeping up with growth as we see more growth in the Grand Mound area and the Boston Harbor area and other parts of the county. And taking care of ongoing pollution issues that we may encounter and trying to prevent those in the future through these upgrades. The final category is the county facilities, general government facilities. So the courthouse, public health building, the Mottman complex. Again, this is all about providing safe and sustainable public facilities to serve our public, to do things like elections, to do things like all of the public health work that we do, planning, permitting, public works. We all have to have somewhere to sit and operate from and host the public in. And so the priorities for these projects are selected for the safety, health, accessibility, and all the other words listed here, effectiveness of these facilities. Funding comes from real estate excise tax, central service building reserve, trial court improvement fund, and future bonds. And it's a big ticket item. These are big buildings that need to be maintained, and most of them are pretty old. 123.5 million over the next 6 years. And here's sort of the laundry list. A lot of these have to do with basic repairs that are needed to our older courthouse building complex, as well as some upgrades and infrastructure repairs to some of our other facilities like the Public Works facility. So safety and security is the name of the game, making sure that employees and visitors to our facilities are safe and secure, avoiding systems failure like an HVAC system failure, which could happen if we don't fix it. There is something in there for future land acquisition still in, I think, year 6, looking out for a new courthouse site. So that remains on the plan. Again, a plan, not yet a budget, not yet a commitment. Electric vehicle charging stations, this is pretty cool. Adding these stations in the county allows us to expand our electric vehicle fleet, which is something that the county has been trying to do, and that's good for all of us. And then expansion of the current ballot processing center at the Mottman facility so that we can have efficiently run elections, which is also pretty important. So now I'm going to stop sharing. and open it up to questions. So if you have a question, go ahead and say it's about transportation or whatever. And then I think that staff member can help answer those questions, unless it's a process question, which is.
Well, I'll start if that's okay. My first one is about parks and trails and funding, and it's specific to the conservation futures funding. And I was just hoping that maybe Jennifer or Robin could explain the limitations on what conservation futures funds can be used for, because they're not used very much in that spreadsheet that you had, and it was always only for acquisitions. Is it limited only to acquiring new land and can't do any upgrades to that land with it?
The Conservation and Futures Fund can only be used for acquisition and major maintenance projects. So we do have some of that in Conservation Futures, and up to 25% can be used for M&O. So, and we do the maximum possible amount for maintenance and operations of our parks.
All right, I'm not sure if the Planning Commission or where the appropriate input would be needed, but if we had any say on anything, I would really like to see more conservation futures monies spent in our parks and trails program, and not so much sending the money out to other organizations to buy land to add to their balance sheet. So I don't know how to do that or where that would be appropriate to do, but if we could keep more of that conservation futures money in-house by improving our own parks and trails, I think that would be a fantastic thing.
Are there any other questions?
Other questions? Oh,
sorry, Jim.
Doing Jim.
I guess Eric brought up a good question. Are we gonna try to address that or not?
The Planning Commission has the ability to, I would say, after public hearing, you'll have a work session immediately following your public hearing, and then that would be something that you could forward as part of your recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, which with your rationale of why you're making that recommendation.
That's all I got for tonight.
And if I'm not seeing any other questions, is there anyone willing to make a motion to move to set a public hearing on the capital improvement program for November 3rd, 2021?
I'll make a motion to set a public hearing for the 2001, 2027.
22 to 27.
22 to 27 capital improvement program for 7 p.m. on November 3rd, 2021.
I'll second.
Is there any other discussion? All those in favor of setting the public hearing for November 3rd, 2021, signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, thanks all that staff for being here, and look forward to seeing the public hearing. Thanks all.
Thank you all.
So, thanks guys, we're moving forward. Looks like we're doing the work session on the Castle Land Use Amendment. Maya, you're up.
Good evening, Commissioners. Maya Teeple, Senior Planner with Community Planning. This is a follow-up on the Upcastle Land Use and Rezoning Amendment from our last meeting in mid-August. And just as a quick recap, the Planning Commission has scheduled a public hearing for this item, and it will be held on October 6th. But at our last work session on this item, the Planning Commission had some additional questions about how this rezone and land use amendment could potentially affect the HCP. So I'm bringing back that information tonight. It should be fairly quick. I've spoken with Chris Chapeau, who's managing this project, and she's described to me how it could potentially impact it. So the way the HCP will work is that there is a limited number and amount of take or credits that the county can have under that approved HCP once it's done, and it's projected to be over a 30-year permit term. If the rezoning and land use amendment is completed for the specific property, and then development of that area takes place, it could require as much as 5 times more in mitigation to offset the impacts as opposed to under its current zoning. So that's kind of the key piece there, is it could require up to 5 times more. And that would result in there being that much less to folks that are also affected by that same area of, whatever species is covered under it. And then the total amount of take available to others in that area drops faster than initially anticipated. So the reason we can't provide a definitive number of how many developments this might affect or how many individual landowners is because the HCP and the incidental take permit has not been issued yet. So there's still a lot of moving factors and a number of variables that could impact that specific amount of landowners that are impacted. And just as an example, the type of construction that occurs on a property is something that changes the amount of credits that are used. So it's really kind of a case-by-case basis on how much construction we see in the zoning at the time of the ITP approval. So the main takeaway for the Planning Commission on this topic is that rezones that fall within the area that are impacted by the HCP, particularly rezones that would convert from residential to another use like industrial or commercial, could accelerate the use of credits in that area. And completing these types of land use changes on a case-by-case basis adds an element of uncertainty to the HCP and the ITP. And it also adds an element of uncertainty to how long it will ultimately be valid for. So that's the general information I have to bring back to you on that and how it would potentially relate to the HCP. And if there's any questions, I can try to answer that, but unfortunately all we can provide at this time is pretty general information.
Maya, if we do this and they do start getting more takings than we were, if they would have been taking as residential, is there any way that we can make sure that the developers bear the full cost of those takings and it doesn't impact anybody else? And I'm not sure if that's a monetary thing or if they got to, buy land in a land bank or what they have to do. But I'm very concerned about turning residential land into industrial land and then that impacting the ability to develop somewhere else in the county at a cost that's not borne by that particular developer.
Right. So my understanding is the developer would be responsible for paying for the credits that they use. So that 5 times more amount will fall on them. And it doesn't necessarily shift the financial burden to others, but it would make less available and could potentially make the ITP run out a little bit quicker than the 30-year time limit that we're planning for. But I can certainly bring that up to the person who's working on the HCP. And, if the Planning Commission recommends an approval for this change, that's something we can investigate further as the HCP moves along.
Do you have any other questions on this subject?
I do.
Go ahead.
This is Kevin.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Couple of the public speakers, I think Loretta and maybe Christy, commented on a ripple effect and that this opening up a number of other properties to potential transformation into warehouses, industrial use. Does Maya have any comment on the accuracy of that and how much ripple effect might be from that?
Yeah, I can touch on that briefly. So the zoning change is specific to the two properties that are being considered. But in order to do the use that the applicant ultimately wants to do, that's the reason for the code change. And Loretta summarized that very well. That's part of the reason they're requesting the code change with the land use change. But the code change will apply to the entire rural county. So any property that would be eligible under the new code could potentially apply for a more intensive type of industrial use. And I mean, Loretta pretty much hit the nail head on. Currently, it's mostly resource industrial uses, and there's a very small area, and it has to meet several locational criteria under the current code, where more intensive industrial uses like manufacturing and warehousing can occur. This would expand that a little bit, so it would allow it in cases where an industrial site already exists if it's adjacent to it, and it also adds a little bit more flexibility on the road standards. So potentially we could see a ripple effect and more industrial requests for these types of manufacturing and warehouse uses come in other areas of the county. The specific acreage and impact of that, we haven't done a full analysis on that yet. So.
Thank you for clarifying. I've heard a large number of concerns from a number of planning commissioners about this possible change. I've heard a large number of public comments, including even from Nathaniel Jones, begging us not to make this change. I've heard fairly few descriptions of positive or upside to making this change. So I have a large number of concerns about this.
Yep. And as I mentioned, that public hearing will be on October 6th. I do expect that we'll get quite a bit of public comment on that. You know, sometimes we have quiet hearings. This one will probably get a little bit more traction from public and citizens, and all of those comments that we receive in written format will be provided to the Planning Commission for that public hearing. So.
Do you expect the applicant to show up to the public hearing? Have they said that they would or not?
I don't know. I can ask Andrew to check in and see if the applicant wishes to make a comment on his amendment and let him know that that's coming up.
I had asked last time about my concern that we haven't set aside enough industrial zoning areas, and so we keep getting these individual requests. And that, remind me again what you said, that we could make a recommendation to the BOCC to put that on the docket for us, or?
Yeah, so as I mentioned at the last meeting when we discussed this topic, we have a number of site-specific industrial requests to rezone to industrial lands. And if the Planning Commission feels that the appropriate direction is to do a holistic look at the entire county to determine whether or not more industrial lands are needed and in what areas those lands should be sited, then the Planning Commission could produce that in a recommendation. But you'll want to wait until after you hear all the public comment on that. And then the board could consider that comment and make their decision as they wish. But that certainly is something the Planning Commission can recommend. I mean, that we have another rezone where we're going to have to do a little bit of industrial lands analysis on the docket already. So that's a reasonable recommendation for the Planning Commission to make for something like this.
But you said that we would make that recommendation after we get all the public comment. You're talking about the public comment on this rezone and the next rezone and the next rezone, or are you talking about us having a public hearing on this specific thing and then make a recommendation?
You could make that recommendation following the public hearing for this site-specific land use amendment. If after hearing this and, you know, the research that's been presented to you felt strongly enough, so.
So Maya, you mentioned that, you know, and what we heard from the public speaking is that there might be this ripple effect. And it sounds like that would probably be very true. Is there, if the code language is changed, do we know, or do we have an idea of what will be affected and what the possibility is of what properties may be? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the way the code language is proposed to change specifically would allow for these more intensive industrial uses next to existing industrial uses. That's how it's written. And there, right now, there's also this clause in there that says, or if it's, I think it's a quarter mile or a half a mile from an I-5 interchange. So if it's not a half a mile from an I-5 interchange and it's further than that, but it's next to an industrially zoned site, then that land could also rezone. The one thing that is also proposed in the code that was not mentioned in public comment is that there would probably be a date cap on that. So it would say zoned as industrial as of the date of adoption of the ordinance. As far as how many acres of industrial zone lands we have in rural Thurston County, it's very small. I don't know the acreage off the top of my head, but I could certainly have Andrew bring that back after the public hearing for the Planning Commission.
I think that would be a good thing. And plus, if there's a possibility of finding out how many additional acres would be affected.
I don't know if in your industry they use the term industrial sprawl, but it kind of sounds like, you know, everybody's really worried about industrial sprawl and this kind of thing. Would we be able to, is there a possible compromise in there somewhere where if you're not within a half mile of an I-5 interchange, we can expand that out to maybe a 1 mile or something like that, just so that way we can kind of cap the industrial sprawl to a certain degree and give some more flexibility to landowners to capitalize on their properties?
And we did look at changing the I-5 interchange requirement instead of having this next to an industrial zone site. Unfortunately, that would not work for this applicant that is looking to rezone their properties. They're about 3 miles from an I-5 interchange. So in either direction, in Lewis County or in Thurston County. So that's the reason that specific clause got added in there.
Fair enough, thank you.
Mhm.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, on to the next item. The work session to amend standards for places of worship.
Great. So I will go ahead and share my screen. So this is for the Places of Worship Development Code Amendment. And just to recap, the first and only work session we've had on this item so far was on August 4th. And at that work session, we reviewed the proposal, we reviewed the current code language and the proposed amendment. And we also reviewed consistency with other plans and regulations, as well as some feedback that was received from the City of Olympia. And the Planning Commission had a number of questions and additional follow-up that was requested at that meeting. So that is what tonight's will cover. And specifically, the questions that were asked were to bring back an alternative option that considers limiting the size and scale of dormitories that are permitted with places of worship, to research how sewer, septic, and water and traffic may impact the size and scale of these types of uses, and also to request some additional feedback from the city. I'm happy to say that all of those things will be covered in this presentation. So something that came up in the last meeting was why there wasn't a map included of the applicant's property, and It was mentioned, but this is a code change, so it will impact the whole Olympia UGA. So the circumstances that are at the applicant's property are unique and won't necessarily apply to someone else who might apply under the new code language. But as a matter of background, I did want to provide some information on the applicant's property and then context to how that relates to other properties in the urban growth area. So the applicant's property is in the northeast area of the Olympia UGA. And it's about 500 feet from the city boundary, and they do have sewer and water provided by the city at the site. So other properties that could apply under the proposed regulations might have different circumstances, and they could range up to 1.5 miles from the city boundary. They could have city provided water and sewer, or they could rely on septic system or a private well, or even a community water system in some cases. And a quick search of the word church and all of the properties that contained that word shows that about 75% of the properties containing the word church are already located in the city of Olympia. And then there's another 25% that are cited in the Olympia urban growth area. And of those in the Olympia urban growth area, more than half of them are adjacent to the city boundaries. So I know the question was asked, what is the chance that some of these churches are annexed by the city in the future? And going based off of location, it sounds like half of them are right along the urban growth area. So they would probably be pretty likely to be annexed over the next 20 years if the UGA expands. Of course, that's not a perfect search because not every property will contain the word church in it, but that is the analysis that I have. So going over some of the questions from last meeting, a little bit about water. As I mentioned, water can be provided either by the city, or a property could rely on a private well or a community water system. And developers can extend to the city's water system if it's available to them. So extensions must meet certain standards by the City of Olympia Public Works, their Department of Health, and also their water system plan and their fire department requirements. And typically it can't go through an adjacent property. So unless the property is already adjacent to a water line, they can't extend through someone else's property to get to that water line. And there's a number of areas in the urban growth area where certain properties are kind of quadrant off. I'll show a map of that in a little bit. But properties that are on private well are required to assess the capacity before doing a specific land use permit. And that's part of the demonstration of water availability that's required under the Thurston County Sanitary Code. So landowners that apply on private well would be required to show that they have capacity to meet the use. So looking at sewer, this gets a little bit more complicated for me to explain, but I'll do the best I can to simplify this. So areas in the urban growth area can have either sewer or septic systems, and landowners may have the option to convert to sewer. Again, same thing as water, they have to be eligible to connect, and they have to be in an area where that's feasible. So typically adjacent to an existing sewer line, or where they could extend it without going through a neighbor's property. For developments other than single family residential, so that would be multifamily or non-residential developments, the minimum land area that is required for each unit of volume and unit of volume of sewage is calculated in a very specific way. So I did provide an attachment of a policy from environmental health that shows how that's calculated. But for multifamily and non-residential, it's basically the number of bedrooms times 120 gallons per bedroom per day. And that total is divided by 1 unit of volume of sewage, which is 450 for multifamily. And this is all outlined in the sanitary code. And then depending on the soil type on the property, limits the size that would be required. So most of these developments would require, a certain size of land in order to meet a certain sewage rate, and that is how that is determined. So as I mentioned, there are some areas in the urban growth area that are difficult to sewer, and that could be due to a number of reasons. It could be due to environmental conditions, or it could be because they are separated by neighborhoods that are existing on septic, and they can't connect through those neighborhoods to a sewer line. And these red areas are the areas that are considered difficult to sewer. And there's two specifically within the Olympia urban growth area. One is along South Bay Road to the north here, and then the other is a small area just west of Rich Road along the city of Tumwater border in the edge of the urban growth area. So looking at traffic is reviewed at both the land use permit and the building permit stages. And for land use review, the department would look to see how traffic will impact the county road system. It could trigger the need for offsite improvements or additional fees to help mitigate offsite issues. And the level of submittals that are required of the applicant for traffic evaluation is based on the estimated amount of traffic to be generated. And also if the county has known issue areas that might be affected by the proposal, then they'll require further investigation of that area specifically and how the traffic generated could impact that. For building permits, traffic impact fees are assessed, and for single family homes, there's a flat fee, but for other types of buildings, this is assessed at $5.24 per square foot. And impact fees are always assessed regardless of SEPA. But if SEPA is required, then this would allow outside agencies to assess the impacts for the portions of their roads. And in the county code, SEPA is basically triggered of a certain amount of residential structures. So if it's over a certain amount, I believe if it's more than 9 units within the urban growth area, then it triggers a SEPA review. And then certain types of special uses might also require SEPA review. So going over the revised code options before the Planning Commission, these are in attachment A of the packet that was provided for tonight. Option 1 is the same as what was presented in the August 4th meeting, and that option would expand the zones where dorms can occur only with places of worship, so it is closed off to that through a special use permit to be allowed in R4 and R4 to 8. Option 2 is the new option that was requested by the Planning Commission, and this expands the zones where dorms can occur just like in option 1, but it also includes some regulatory language to limit the size and scale of dormitories that are permitted with places of worship. And there are currently 2 criteria in this option as a way to regulate size and scale. Both could be included in the code, but both don't need to be included. It could be kind of a one or the other type of thing. So one criteria limits size and scale by requiring that dorms permitted with places of worship be accessory to the principal place of worship on site the property. And the second criteria limits size and scale based on the square footage and the bed and unit numbers. And the current caps in the code are 5,500 square feet total, or a maximum of 20 beds and 10 rooms. And those numbers are flexible, but that's fairly consistent with what other types of uses in the county would regulate based on. For example, co-housing regulates up to 5,000 square feet. And then option 3, this was purely from City of Olympia's original comments. They had suggested that the county look into a alternative type of use as opposed to expanding the zones where dorms can be permitted with places of worship. And specifically, they suggested looking into guest houses or single room occupancies, but these types of uses likely won't meet the applicant's needs, but it could provide for a less impactful alternative. So this is just a quick map to show the change of the code under options 1 and 2. So the blue shows the areas where dormitories are currently allowed within the urban growth area, and it's a fairly small amount, approximately 716 acres. And then the pink shows the additional areas where dorms would be allowed within the urban growth area, only in conjunction with a place of worship. So it looks like a lot of area, but again, we're closing it off to only permit dorms in these areas with a place of worship. And that would be an additional 2,900 acres. So staff did work with the city of Olympia, and I provided the city the 3 options and had a couple discussions with them about why the third option wouldn't necessarily meet the applicant's desired use. And after having that conversation, ultimately the city of Olympia expressed support for option 2. So they had a little bit of feedback on that second option with the size and scale limitation. Basically, their recommendation was to make a clear connection to the on-site worship facility so that the county avoids situations where a property is owned by a church, but there's not any other affiliated uses on it, like a church or a health center or anything like that, and it's just the residential element. And then they also requested that the county consider wording that indicates the dorm must be accessory in size, scale, and function to the principal use, to the place of worship. So that is part of the code language that's before the Planning Commission tonight. They suggested that occupant limitations and side limitations are a good approach to limiting the size and scale of the dorm, but that requiring the dorm to be accessory over having a set size limitation might address a broader range of future uses. It would allow for more flexibility to specific landowners and their individual cases that come in. So we could just use a requirement that the dorm be accessory to the principal structure on site rather than having a set square footage limitation. And they also recommended to treat religious facilities and nonprofits similarly. Both types under places of worship would be treated the same in this code change. We're not making changes to the broader dormitory section. So how a college might be impacted would not be changed by this code. So the next steps for the Planning Commission, if there's no further questions from the Planning Commission, then you're welcome to schedule a public hearing, and staff would be requesting that that public hearing be set for November 3rd, 7 p.m. And the other thing that I would like direction from on if the Planning Commission is prepared to move forward with a public hearing is which options do they want to move forward to public hearing? Is it just option 1 and 2 or all 3? So that's my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions we have at this point.
I have a question, Maya. Does this code change apply only to the Olympia UGA?
Yes.
Thank you.
I have a question. This is Kevin. You mentioned that the option 3 might not meet the applicant's needs. What are the applicant's needs?
Well, the size of the development that the applicant wishes to have is a little bit larger than what would be allowed. And also most of the zones where single room occupancies are permitted in are not the zones that the applicant's property falls under. So they would really be limited if that option moved forward, they would really be limited to a guest house style facility, and that just doesn't meet their needs of training and housing students on site for an extended period of time. It's more of a situation where you might have 1 or 2 rooms of folks staying on the site.
Okay, so they're not trying to build some huge dormitory.
No, from the original request that came in, I think they want to have like 9 or 10 rooms. It would fall under the size limitation that was originally presented in the code. So 10 rooms, 20 beds, and they would fall under that limitation.
Thank you.
I'm in favor of moving forward with options 1 and 2.
If that's a motion, I'll second it.
Okay, so let's back up. So are you willing to make a motion for the public hearing with options 1 and 2, Don?
Actually, it was just a comment, but I'm willing to make that motion. Do we move ahead for the public hearing with options 1 and 2?
Okay, I'll second.
Okay, just for more clarification, is that official enough, Maya or Jennifer?
Can we clarify the date and time on that as well?
Okay. Could you put that back on the screen so you could just read
I
that?
sure can.
Thanks,
Yep.
Maya. Okay, Don, would you be willing to read that for us?
Sure. I move to set a public hearing on Development Code docket item CR5, the Places of Worship Development Code Amendment for Wednesday, November 3rd, 2021 at 7 p.m. or soon thereafter as a matter may be heard.
Thank you. And do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to have the public hearing on this matter. Is there any other conversation? And I'm guessing
This is Kevin.
throwing this in with options 1 and 2 being the forefront. Is everybody agreeable to that?
I'm just a little unclear why we want to limit to just options 1 and 2. The staff came up with option 3. I know it doesn't meet the needs of the applicant completely, but I would think the public would want to weigh in on all available options that are recommended by staff.
We can most certainly do that, or staff can do that. I'm guessing, is that, would that be appropriate for you, Maya?
Yeah, we can certainly include all 3, and the Planning Commission will have flexibility in discussion and recommendation following the public hearing.
Okay, so after that conversation, is there any other conversations in this matter? All those in favor of setting the public hearing, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, so we're moving on. Thank you, Maya. We're up to staff updates. Jennifer.
Yeah, it got dark on me in here. Let's see, I can light myself up. Let's see, I have a couple staff updates. One is on the SMP update. As you know, we are moving forward with a public hearing set for October 20th on the SMP, and staff is working hard on the logistics of that so that we may have an in-person and a virtual component. So more to come on how that's going to work. The public outreach is going very well. We have a lot of traffic on our online open house, and staff has received approximately, 56 written comments since the open house launch, and we're only a few weeks in, so that's good news. And also many phone calls and conversations with citizens about the SMP and what's on the open house and how the property is affected. And that's all really great. That's how it's supposed to work. The postcard was sent out with a smaller font than we had envisioned. So we did get a handful of complaints of folks who said, the font on this postcard is awfully small. It's hard for me to read this link. So we just made the decision to do a second mailing, which is good as well, because I think other people have maybe, misplaced it or not seen it. And so we want to make sure that we hit everyone who owns shoreline property. That's who the mailing's going to. So we're sending out another postcard with much larger font and making sure that our vendor sends it as we designed it. And that'll be happening soon. I think next week is when that is set to go out. So that's how that is going. Let's see. I have another update, a personal update. This is my last planning commission meeting. So it's, I have resigned from the county. My last day, September 30th. It's been my pleasure to serve the citizens of Thurston County, both these last 2 years, and then for the first several years of the decade, starting in 2000, when I was a planner here, and as a planning commissioner. So it's, a little bittersweet, but I'm moving on to other things. And, my hope is just that the Planning Commission acts as a steward of civil discourse and a host of positive public engagement. I know the CPED staff who are going to continue to work with you are consummate professionals. They're going to continue to do that hard work of bringing you the board ideas and citizen ideas and the facts and the professional perspective and the understanding of the broad, diverse community interests, and give you all that information so you can make informed recommendations. So we have a great staff in the planning division, and they're going to continue to do great work with you. And then I didn't know if anyone else had any information they wish to share during staff updates. Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, thanks. And boy, I'm sorry you're leaving. You've been doing a great job for the county. They're gonna miss you. And I also announced that this is going to be my last planning commission meeting. I've been a little over 10 years on the commission, and I sent a letter in earlier this month that I'd be moving on here, but just want to thank all the other commissioners. I think we got a great group, and you're doing a good job, but I particularly want to thank the planning commission staff. That's for 10 years have been on the commission. They do a good job. I mean, they do the hard work and keep us on track, and I'm sure they will continue to do so in the future. So thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Ed. It's a
Gonna be
pleasure
missed.
working with you.
I really appreciate your service for both of you, your input, and generosity with your time, being there. Jennifer, you've always answered the questions. Ed, your insight has been great. You'll both be missed.
And we didn't plan to announce this on the same day. It just happened that way.
There was no plan. It's just coincidence.
Quick comment, Jennifer. We wish you good luck in all your future endeavors.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
As do we all.
Jennifer, is there any chance you would consider coming back to the Planning Commission at some point?
Thank you for the question. I have moved out of Thurston County, and so I don't think that would be appropriate, but I am live somewhere else, and I think I'll be doing other things with my time. So.
Fair enough. Good luck with it.
Absolutely. Both of you guys, good luck in your continuing journey.
Thank you.
I have a question. Go ahead. I was just going to share a final staff update, but you go ahead first, Doug.
A question on Carol Womofsky's testimony tonight. She has come to the Planning Commission for, I think, the last 3 years, asking for her property to be rezoned. I thought it was in process and that we would be getting that to consider by now. What's going on?
So it is under consideration. It's being reviewed as part of the Grand Mound Subarea Plan, and we've had a number of rezone requests that are being processed with that subarea plan. I think there's like 6 6 requests, and several of them are requests to amend the UGA boundaries. So it has taken a little bit longer to arrive to Planning Commission, but we're hoping before the end of the year that that will be one of the items that the Planning Commission starts reviewing. And Wilmofsky's rezone request will be part of that consideration.
And do they know that?
Yes, and they spoke with Shannon tonight after submitting public comment, so.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And the final staff update that I wanted to share is we did send out a doodle poll. I think it was early last week or the week before. We're trying to schedule a special meeting on the Olympia joint plan. This is the second joint plan we'll be reviewing after Tumwater. And a few of the commissioners haven't responded yet to that doodle poll. If you could go ahead and respond to that doodle poll by next week, we'd love to get that date on the calendar. And we're looking at late October and early November for those dates.
I did not receive a doodle poll for that.
Great. I'll have Polly resend that to you, Doug.
Okay.
Thanks, Maya. I was afraid that you were going to resign too.
No.
Yeah, we're loose. They're dropping like flies. Okay, so yeah, again, you guys, you too, good luck in whatever your journey comes, and I hope to see you around town or somewhere.
Okay.
You're gonna be missed. So let's do calendars. Who will there anybody be unable to attend? Oops, can't read it. October 6th.
I might not.
Okay. Okay. How about October 20th? Yeah. So is there any other comments or anything that anybody needs to say before we adjourn?
I just have a kind of a general request. I think it's important that we are all visible on screen for these virtual meetings. And so I would hope that maybe someone could get with Kevin and help him to be able to attend the meeting visually as well as vocally. Same thing with any other commissioners who can't.
Okay, fair enough. So if there's nothing else, we stand adjourned.
Okay.
Great. Thanks. Good luck, everybody.
Good night, all.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.